So it's time to start our first panel of the day. I'm welcoming Anika Meier. She will be moderating this panel discussion. Anika is a really inspiring curator. She has been working at the intersection of human and technology for a few years, maybe a decade actually. And she's having a really strong focus on feminism and technology with her collective co-founded with Margaret Murphy called The Second Guess. Anika curated really inspiring exhibition currently presented at the fourth floor of the Digital Art Mile for Object.com. And today the session will be about collecting and acquisition.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. I've heard that we're missing one member on stage. It's as you can see, Benny Redbeard, but I guess you all know him because he is known for saying this is how we build. And I thought we just in between say this is how we build, and I think then we'll be fine somehow. I remind you to say in between, this is how we build. So very happy to have Auriea Harvey with me. You came in from Italy. Sabine Himmelsbach, director of Hack Basel. You're based here. And Ian, who flew in from also Switzerland, right? And who's working with the Toledo Museum. And we have people here who started working with like Auriea net art and video games in the 90s. And I know about all the struggles from you at ZKM, just, what's the right word, restored one of your main pieces. Yes. Sabine once gave me a tour of her collection. We went into a room, I guess, which, like the digital collection, which NFT people are very likely not familiar with. You really can go somewhere and then you see a massive server and they have a cupboard with a lot of things in there. So she's going to tell us how it was back in the days. And then Ian will tell us about why they collect as a museum CryptoPunks and Chromie Squiggles, I guess. Auriea and Sabine. Also, Auriea, it's really interesting that you were in the NFT space early. So you're a pioneer, you're always working with new technologies. And Feral File is, for example, a platform you were part of early. And the model was really interesting for artists. Can you tell us about how it all started?
Yeah, it's really funny because I now have a policy of never being first on anything. Like, I don't want to be early, but this is how we build, right?
Exactly.
So No, so I was part of, before Feral File was Feral File, Casey Rees did an experiment called A to P, which was an experiment in peer-to-peer file collecting, you might call. And so he just invited a lot of us artists, friends, to become a part of this, and we just exchanged files digitally, and it was recorded on the Bitmark blockchain. And we didn't know what we were doing. This was 2016 or something, or 2017, I want to say. So it was early, yes. But we didn't know that's what we were doing. This thing that would become NFTs. I had a lot of questions in that moment, like, why do it this way? All this but I was hopeful because I thought it might become a way that I could prove ownership of a certain 3D model, because my thing is 3D. So I was very hopeful for the tech very early on, you might say, for other reasons that had nothing to do with crypto or anything. It was really about how to trace a digital work of art. To me, it seemed like a more efficient watermark or something. I don't know. So that became what became Feral File later on, actually, via many twists and turns, I suppose. But the reason I was concerned is, as you say, is that because a lot of my older digital works kind of bloomed and died. Tech kind of comes and goes, and you kind of lose track of what's you know, that this work existed. Let's say it like that. Like an NFT is a way of saying this work is here, it existed, here's the metadata. You can structure that in such a way that it becomes a part of history in a sense, like you're writing the history of your work. And when and then giving it a way to exchange hands, which was something that I couldn't do with a website. And then when I was selling software, it wasn't about like who owned it. It was just a open commodity. So to me, all of this stuff started to seem like a good, happy medium between something publicly available and something privately owned. So that's kind of why I love it. And the way it was before was just, you know, everything would put it on the net and wait for it to die, or, you know, kind of like that. Yeah.
Thank you, and you're still here, so we're speaking about why you're still here later. Sabine, you're the director of Hack Basel, and I guess the NFT people would call you an OG. So you're also here since quite a few decades. Same as Christiane Polci, I think, is in the room, a curator at the Whitney. So I think you're two of the most important curators of digital art, and I really enjoyed the tour of the collection. So before NFTs, like in the old days, how did you collect?
Well, thanks for the compliment, first of all. Yeah, I mean, for me, when I started working on the collection for HEK, it was really where could we make a difference in Switzerland? A lot of Swiss art, and I have to, in brackets, say kind of like the program of HEK, as you might see or have experienced, is very international. But regarding the collection, we are focusing on Swiss media art. That has to do with our national funding, that we have to restrict ourselves with a focus on Swiss art. So the idea is really to tell the history of Swiss media art, but then also, as I said, to make a difference, because a lot of Swiss artists are in many Swiss collections, private or public, but what is always lacking is software and net-based artistic practice. And of course, you know, in times of early net art, also artists were experimenting here, but it's, as you all know, it's complicated, you know, to promise to keep these works alive. And I found that as an institution, it's our duty to find ways of making it work. And of course, there are different approaches. And I cannot promise that we can keep everything forever, but we try. We are mostly working with emulation. Sometimes it needs to be migration when the usual strategies that can be implied. And it also started with an artist donating a work to us from 2003, One Word Movie by Beat Brogler and Philipp Zimmermann. And he has, you know, he donated it, I think, in 2015 or so. And he has been migrating the work and keeping it. And he said, like, I can just no longer do it. You know, it's for me, it's too tough. So we, as an institution, we took on the responsibility to keeping it alive, because also, I think it's important, we as institutions doing that work of building a canon where digital art is an integral part of it, because otherwise these are works that might be forgotten as if it never happened, but it was a very important historic moment and artistic practice. So I think we really have to make an effort. And this is how we built.
Very good. So, and when you showed me the collection, there's really a cupboard, and then there's this big server, and then you've shown me something, and then I shown it to the artists, and they didn't remember that this is their work, right? That's because they created boxes and USB sticks, and they were like, no, this is, and I was like, yes, it is. So how is it now working with artists, and how do you? Yeah.
No, I think it's just a very interesting anecdote or approach that some artists, you just get the hard drive from, I don't know, from Digistore or whatever store they got it from, with nothing, just the file. And then other artists some have a gallery that helped them, they have a nice packaging around it. But in the end, it's still just a hard drive. But it's super interesting to see how it is handled, that someone really tries to find a nice packaging for it. But for us, it's also important to showcase, yes, I mean, of course, there's data, there's nothing. We have the server in our museum. We have two more places where the data is stored. And in a way, it's similar processes to normal forms of collecting. It's just that the digital workflow needs to be a bit explained to museums how this works. And sometimes we have works that are digital but have a physical component, so that's also, more complex.
Yes, thank you. This is how we build. Ian, you worked with VCs, so you come more from the business side, but also have been involved with media publishing, Wired, and so on. And then I asked you how the Toledo Museum got into NFTs and yourself, and you said it's a longer story, so I'm excited for you to share it with us, maybe shorten it a bit.
Okay, thank you. Let me try. First of all, let me say that I'm the NG in the room. I'm the imposter. These guys have been around since the beginning of the new movement that we all think of as Web3 or digital. I'm relatively new in the sense that the Toledo Museum of Art in Ohio, by the way, not Spain, is a traditional museum. We have works going back 16, 20,000 years, and everything coming forward. We have works on stone, on paper, on various other media, and more recently, the transition that was complicated for many people was video, and of course now we have NFTs and everything that's digital. We have a director, Adam Levine, not the singer, who is bright and able and perfectly able to manage a transition for a museum himself. I was brought in partly because I've been mentoring Adam for some time, but also because I've been playing in the space as a collector like some, but as someone who cares about culture and institutions. And just as Sabine was saying about the concern about transitory elements of art disappearing and storage and memory being important in institutions, the Toledo Museum considers itself a museum within the context of now. It's not just history. History brings us to now, but everything that's going on around us, we think it's necessary for us to explain and show and expose. The second thing we're saying about Toledo is that although I get into trouble for saying this, but I'm not an American. I'm from New Zealand originally. It's a bijou of a museum in the middle of nowhere. Right? It's a town of 250,000 people and declining, and yet it has this fantastic collection. It has this fantastic history. Technology allows us to talk to more people than just the people in Toledo. So our work with technology isn't just acquiring squiggles and OMBs and punks and the other things that we have, which we've acquired with our own money, with our own acquisitions fund. It's about being relevant to conversations that take place anywhere where there is interest from this community. So we're trying to be in places, obviously here, but also online and physically in other places where the conversations are going on. I tell the story of if there's a 13-year-old girl doing an art assignment in Toledo, Ohio, in a tenement block 1.5 kilometers from the museum front door, her first thought is not to walk down the door and walk into our museum and look. She goes online on her phone. And on her phone, the answers may be partly influenced by the algorithm to give her a local response. But in general, she'll get an answer from the Met or MoMA or the Tate or another museum around the world. So we, as an institution within Toledo, are competing for mind space with every other institution in the world for someone who lives in our town. And that works both ways. So if we're competing, I think that means that we should spend time, make an effort to be visible to everybody, online and elsewhere. But the technology also allows us an opportunity to be available and present elsewhere, obviously online, but it's not enough. We need physical gatherings. I grew up with screens and I like face-to-face. I don't know about you, but I prefer face-to-face. I prefer being able to clink the glass with someone else rather than just waving at a screen. And I think the technology actually is facilitating that for us as much as anything else.
And you just mentioned the director of the museum, and also we have Sabine with us. So, and with artists, you have to be curious and have to be have a pioneering spirit, and also have to be brave. I think testing out new things. But as an artist, you're like one person, right? And as a museum, you represent an institution. And if you're like fast forward, forward thinking, then you might face a backlash. So. and there's not that many museum directors that are actually like brave and embraced NFTs like early on. That was, you know, ZKM due to Peter Weibel. Then we have the Whitney, thanks to, I think, mainly Christiane Paul. Then we have Regina now working with Momi, Sabine. So it's not so many people. So when you make these decisions as people working with institutions, and you've said you're based with a museum, not yourself, in a smaller town, so how is the response from the public when you then suddenly start collecting things that are considered financial assets?
So in our case, we have an education program. Our job is not just to display. So we bring people in. Well, we have a digital artist in residence program. We had Osanachi a couple of years ago, Kia and Joey from Trader last year, and we have Emily Scheer this year. We always work with a local artist who may or may not be exposed to NFTs, who may not have done it before, and we help them into this world. At the same time, we have students come in of all ages, mature and kids, and we help them get on this train. We help them understand what the technology is like, but also what the fun is like when they're playing with it. I think our goal is to be community-based. We happen to just think of our community as extending beyond just Toledo.
When you talk about digital art, are you talking about digital art, or are you talking about NFTs though? Like when you talk about getting them on this train, because there's two different chains.
Yes, that's fair. And I was talking with Eli yesterday. I think we have concern with the word digital in general because it tends to ghettoize it. We would rather just think of it all as art. And there are different media and different technologies that people use. Obviously, this whole story about everything from the paintbrush through to software being means of conveying ideas and concepts in ways that can express something to an audience. We're a little less definitional about it. We encourage all types of media and expression. NFTs are a component right now, but it's only a component for us. We do everything.
I mean, for us, it's what you said, Ian. It's really about community building and helping, facilitating, and speaking about media art in general, and Web3. For example, in 2023, we really had an extensive program of helping people understand the Web3 space and what an NFT is and how to do it. Not because we necessarily wanted people to onboard them to buy, but just to understand and that they were enabled to make their own decision if it was something interesting for them or not. And we also experimented with building a circle of friends that was blockchain based. We actually this year we started to open it up, so it's no longer blockchain because it is a difficult space for many people, and we wanted to be as inclusive as possible. So now we changed that, but at the beginning we were also, when someone did not have a wallet, we were keeping sort of their tokens and helping them. But for me, it was really a moment. It was such an important technology that we as a museum help for people to understand. But that is the same for media art. When we have a generative artwork, a lot of people think it's a video, and you have to explain to them that this is not a video, that is live code and acted before them. So I think that is what we do as museums, to also educate people, make them understand what is it actually that they see.
So yeah, you experimented with the DAO, right?
Yeah, exactly. We had this Friends of Heck DAO.
You didn't even use the word yourself, right? I figured.
I don't know.
I guess traditional people, and I call you a traditional person because that's how the NFT space somehow sees it, right? And I'm suddenly introduced as a Web3 curator. I'm always like, help. Because that's really interesting, the wording, right? As you've just said, do you mean digital or NFTs? And yeah, it seems to be a lot about the wording, or how you said, or Eli, you just mentioned him, tweeted about digital art being contemporary art, and then we have the main fair and the digital art mile. So
Because it's not really, is it? I mean, they're two different environments, but you know, the art world is like that. There's not just one art world; there are many, you know. And so perhaps what we're terming the digital art world is just one of them. But I would say that also, like, there are huge concerns about. I mean, why I think I'm sitting here when we're talking about how we build. It's really about when you collect something, preservation is like a huge issue, you know, and I'm here to like sort of keep talking about that aspect of collecting, because it's not just about keeping it in a warehouse in Freeport somewhere. It's really, and server can't become that, you know, either, because you have to keep moving. It's like that data has to keep moving. You have to keep it alive in various strategies, as Sabine mentioned, like emulation is one way, but you have to, in my opinion, have this documentation that the work was ever alive in a way, because you can't count on keeping it alive. So there has to be like other strategies for collectors of this type of work, of media-based work, to sort of document what's going on. NFTs are in some ways good for that, because you can at least have the metadata, you know, preserved and all this other stuff. That's helpful. But maybe there has to be, in addition, like this kind of, what do they call it? Like a media strategy that includes description, that includes experience and context, and, you know, all of this sort of stuff. And that's the job of a museum. You know, that's what museums do. It's not just about that object, but about the culture that created that object. You know, don't you think?
Absolutely, and I think it's worth probably saying that when we have a digital artist in residence come, obviously there's a one-of-one produced, but we also have drops of different sizes, and we facilitate wallets for people, soft or encourage hard, and we make sure that there's a process that encourages local members of the community to receive, all of which we give away, none of which is sold. POAPs really, and we offer an opportunity for people to start a collection free with us from really well-known artists, so that they can get engaged, so they can get excited about it. And as a museum, of course, we have the same problem that everybody has about preservation. We've got multiple wallets, we actually separate it in jurisdictions, we're worried about being hacked, but we also want to make sure stuff is shown. We often work with artists to make sure there's a physical component to an exhibition, if not obviously for every work. So we happen to have a glass foundry, so there's always a glass piece created. That's part of the history of the museum. There's always a glass piece created by our digital artists in residence, and all of this creates connections to community. We're not concerned with selling, we're not concerned with market. We are concerned about exposing people to something which is cool and fun, and engaging younger communities of artists or would-be artists or students in the Toledo area.
And museums are used to engaging with an audience and educating them, and you have to move with the time if you're forward thinking. And as an artist, you're usually used to working like as an artist, right? Creating work and not having to engage with the, let's say, broader public. And suddenly through NFTs, you're somehow forced to be.
But that's never been the case for digital people who work with media art. I mean, I would say that media artists have been the most engaged with their audience. I mean, it's part of it. It's part performance in a certain sense. And I would definitely say that when I began with all this stuff in the 90s, like with net art, that was definitely about connection directly to the audience, with no middlemen, no galleries, no museums, nothing. You know, and I know that there are initiatives now. I'm just looking at Regina who came in and thinking like, yeah, no, there are plenty of initiatives now that are sort of artists focus about you know, preservation and of that data, that have to do with more peer-to-peer systems. Of course, I'm calling out the data trust of transfer, and also other types of initiatives that are more about connecting people with stories, that sort of contextual aspect that I was referring to earlier, that have to do with, like, you know, sort of app-based systems that have nothing to do with blockchain, in other words, you know. I'm thinking of this app called particle.art. And so there's just like, I think that in a way, artists are always kind of caught in this in-between, like knowing that in some ways it's our responsibility to make sure that the memory of our works continue in a certain sense, because we're the one that wants that. But also looking at the institutions and thinking, well, what are you doing to keep this work alive? You know, because there was a certain point in the past where digital art was collected, and then that the fad disappeared, you might say, and the work was just left to die there as well. You know, it's like, so you're constantly, as a media artist, you're constantly in this state of thinking, is my work ephemeral or is it eternal? The data, technically speaking, should be eternal because it's just data, right? It's in a sense like it's zeros and ones, it's text files, it's code. You know, you think, oh, in the future, archaeologists will discover this code and write a new interpreter, you know, or something like this. It's like, so what can you do as an artist to create the best archive of that work so that it can be rediscovered, you know, in the future? You're in some ways, all of us are thinking like that all the time, you know. It's like, or do you just let it go? You know, it's like, so I don't know if you know what I mean. I think you've dealt with enough artists that you understand this conundrum that we kind of have, or this thinking that we have, or sometimes not thinking about it at all, which is a problem too.
Absolutely. And my experience was that, you know, originally not every artist is thinking of the documentation. And thank God, often enough, we have the chance to work with them, hardly when we acquire a piece, to discuss all these options. So we did this show with Auriea about her piece, and she said it's actually not understandable that it's still working because she was writing the code herself with many mistakes, but then, and to figure out why it is working, although that has so many mistakes, that was kind of also a very interesting system. But I don't know, the discussion we had, I just had to think, because in 1999 I was also involved in co-curating the exhibition Net Condition with Peter Weibel, and when we think it's a bit more than 20 years, and at that time a general audience had no idea, you know, how to serve the web, and to show them how to engage with these works. Yeah, it's kind of like this really, really high pace that we are talking here, and in terms of also technological changes and advances.
Because you've just mentioned ZKM, I also wanted to briefly mention them because I've been there. They just have a new presentation of their collection, and some of the pieces they installed for the first time. Or they've done a solo show, a group show with an artist, and the artist left the pieces, team changes, and suddenly some pieces they've tried to show for the first time again. So, and then I asked them, well, what do you do to that it doesn't happen again? And they were like, yeah, we buy 3 of everything. So they have 1 for display, and then they buy 2 more, like, let's just say screens, for example. So, but they must have a huge stuff, and like how many people are involved in just keeping the work alive. That was like very impressive, and I don't want to know how big their storage is. So I think we have like 5 minutes left, and I would like to ask you one last question. So as museum people, how do you decide when thinking about collecting and acquiring work for the collection? I know, Ian, you're not the curator, but I guess you're involved in the process. And also, Auriea, for you as an artist, you said you don't want to be the first, even though this is how we build. So yeah, how do you make the decision what you acquire or what Auriea you work on?
In our case, it's being part of the community that helps us understand. We try not to be on the outside looking in. We try to be involved in discussions. It isn't necessarily true that everything we acquire, when we look back on it in 20 years' time, will be seen as foundational. It isn't. We don't know when we acquire something if something is going to be important enough that people will want to see it in 20 years' time or 40 years' time. We just buy what seems of the moment that we think is of quality. There's a curatorial process which looks at the usual things that curators look at. But then there's the community process. It's not quite like a DAO in our community, but it is a group of minds that help us understand what we should be looking at, what we like looking at, and there's toing and froing. And sometimes if you're dealing with traditional curatorial teams trained in traditional ways, it can be interesting as a discussion. But that's what makes us do what we do, and that's how we navigate.
I mean, for us, it's also, as I mentioned earlier, really trying to to showcase the history of media art in Switzerland with that particular focus on software and net-based practice, as these works are not collected anywhere else, at least here in Switzerland. And then, of course, looking for quality in the works. And what is an important part of my work is also the kind of political policy making to make the people understand who gives us money that it's actually often not only the money for the acquisition, because it's often not that expensive, the work, because that's not such a big market, because it's complex to keep the works alive, but that we continuously need to engage to keep it alive and to make that understandable.
I think it's a shame that Benny's not here. He's like the missing element, this like extra, like, you know, the private collector, you might say, or someone who has an interest in public collections, but is really sort of speaking for himself as a collector. Because I could talk about the artist position on this, but I don't know how we build. I mean, I need him to tell us. No, anyway.
So he is part of our community. He's one of the members of our community and helps us decide.
No, it's fantastic. I mean, he's helping you decide. I think this is like a new element for a lot of media artists. I know some people are new to this train and don't realize how novel it is to have to think about the collector of your digital work. That's very exotic. I'd say that for a long time, most media artists were working in the context of festivals and so sort of public engagement, you know, or online, or the work was considered more experimental, so it was within academia in a sense, or something like this. So I would say, speaking for the artist community in this sense, which it's still a novel idea to have to think about the private collector. Thinking about institutions is one thing, but thinking about private collectors is something else. And I do know that it has affected the type of work that is made. Even for me personally, honestly, you know, it's like I start thinking about, how can I make this collectible? How can I make that cute package? How can I make that, you know, or how can I mint this in a way that's going to be, you know, get attention or something like that? I find that somewhat detrimental if I'm like got my idealist hat on, because, you know, painters have that built in a way. It's a painting, you hang it on the wall, you know what I mean? It's like, you know what your engagement is. But for us as media artists, we have so many different ways of engaging and creating a work that speaks to a collector, like, and you kind of have to be a bit flashy about it in a way right now. I find that weird on the one hand, but on another hand, it's just human nature. So I think that while it doesn't directly inflect my work with any specific type of new content or whatever, I still work in the way that I want. But at the same time, there is always in the back of my head this thought, like, well, where is this work going to end up? Before I kind of knew it was just going to end up in the trash heap of time, you know. It's but like now it's sort of like it's exciting on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's a bit of a new thing. It's just all very new. And like I said, I don't like being early.
I do think that's been part of contemporary for some time, though. It's this notion that there are so many artists now, and there's so many works produced. Was it Art Newspaper last week that said that 99% of all gallery shows last year were about 1% of the artists? These days, you have to create a brand. It's frustrating. It's irritating. I started in this space loving the work, and now I realize that even for us as museums, we're influenced by the branding that different artists have. Yeah. It's what sells, it's what gets the noise, it's what people expect to see, and we find ourselves guided by that, and I'm a bit frustrated by that.
What's even worse is that 96% of all art sold is a painting. So, I mean, you know, we're sitting here
the
talking
world moves slowly.
Yeah, the world turns slowly, so we're just sitting here with, like, you know, a percentage of a percentage of a percentage, so branding, yeah, we could call it that, but, you know.
I mean, the interesting part is I was surprised by the numbers. I don't even know why. There's 290 galleries exhibiting at Art Basel and 4,000 artists. That's a lot, right? And it's all painting. I mean, even someone working at Art Basel was like, there's hardly any digital work. Like, really, there's hardly any digital work this year.
I'm just walking around going, where are the screens?
There's no screens, but then I can also tell you, as someone doing an exhibition, it's expensive to rent screens. So then to set up the screens, it's a pain, I can just tell you. So that's why everybody's like, get rid of the screens and do something printed, because it's easy to ship and it's more affordable for people. So yeah, so we have, I don't know if Seth is still in the room. I mean, we only have like 4 more minutes. Seth, I know that Benny asked you to speak on his behalf. So did he give you any message he would like to share with us other than this is how we build?
We really want to know.
Great. Any perspective you would like to share as, the founder of Bright Moments?
Yeah, so I guess this is a kind of an open question for them. I'm Seth Goldstein,
Hi, Seth.
a founder of Bright Moments, among other things. And I actually was, some of you know that in '92 or so, I was the archivist for Robert Wilson, and I put his archives on CD-ROM and brought it to ZKM, to Jeffrey Shaw in like '92 or '93. So I was aware then of some of the challenges of preserving and digital art. I think the institutions have done a great job of catching up to performance art and time-based art, and what I'm curious about now to hear is, like you said, about 99% or 95% of the money's going to paintings. I think we're starting to set up a world where, okay, the institutions can show digital art on big screens. Screens are becoming commodities. Every retail store has a giant LED screen. But as AI art becomes more pervasive and we have more agents doing things, you've seen Freza, you've seen DX Terminal, some of these swarm-based AI agent art projects. How do you start thinking about showing those in physical environments? Similar to how, the challenges of showing time-based art media, but how do you show some of these new primitives and some of these new experiences of AI natively in the institution?
I mean, we have a show on at the moment that is titled Other Intelligences, and that is actually building on 2 strands of interest that we have been working on over the years. One is, showing AI. The first show that we did was in 2019, titled Entangled Realities, and that was, of course, before the hype and the large language models. And another interest that we continuously been working on is how technology helps us for a better understanding of our environment. So kind of like nature and technology, how does it go together? And there we span works that are using AI and even works that say kind of like, yeah, maybe AI should have more agency than us. But then we are also looking at plant intelligent or the wood wide web and look, it's really more about the more than human intelligences to get away from to always measuring everything towards the human brain. So we try to do it, again, looking at what is out there. And I have to say, since 2019, there has not been a show where we did not have an AI-based work in it.
The only thing I would do is to say, if you came to the Trader show we had last year, the room in which we placed Kia's works is the size of this room. The screens we had were white walls, so directly fed, 5 meters across, very slow moving video, all in black and white, as that series was. It was wonderfully impactful. And I think they were pleased to see that we'd made it the biggest single part of that exhibition we had on Ethiopian art at the time. And it was in context. One of the fortunate things about museums is we have budgets and rooms. So we can spend some time with the artists trying to work out what they'd like to do and how they'd like to do it. And we leave the show up for 3 months, and it means it's possible for a lot of people to come in and see it. So our goal is to work with the artists to do it right. And that's what we can do.
That's beautiful closing words. I think, we need to leave the stage. Thank you so much to all of you, and let's continue building. Thank you.